So, thank you all for participating. And now, 65,000 libraries in Europe. And there's almost 100, I think, participating this year in this year's program, or so far at least. So there must be a huge diversity in what the state of libraries is in Europe. There might be lighthouse landmarks in one part of Europe. Also, this library, I think, is a beautiful example, in the one in Birmingham and so many others. But there's also many libraries in Europe that face collapse or face closure due to maybe a lack of funding, lack of interest, or maybe a bit of both. So what really are the lessons that we can learn from those libraries that are thriving at the moment? How can we make sure that all libraries, all those 65,000, can be thriving again in the next couple of years? What can we learn from each other? And what lessons really are to be distilled, not just from today, but from the research that has been done over the past couple of months and years. And we're going to discuss this with three amazing guests, coming both from libraries themselves as from government and policy, to see how we can really bring that new energy, look for that new impetus to make sure that libraries can really become those democratic centers that really fuel social connection, democracy, and maybe even fight the climate crisis, as we discussed earlier today. And I'm going to invite them one by one. The first up is a director of libraries at the Arts Council England, and he's also a strong advocate for the role of libraries in trying to promote digital literacy, figuring out a new way of how to introduce AI into libraries and books. And he's an archaeologist turned librarian. He is also the chair of the English Public Libraries Stakeholder Working Group and a member of the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professional. Please join me in welcoming Luke Burton. Second up is an independent consultant for arts and culture. She was previously the State Secretary for Culture in Portugal and also a former I have to say this correctly, also a former deputy mayor of culture in Lisbon, where she oversaw the creation of the strategic program for the 21st century library, which oversaw the expansion and renewal of city libraries in the city of Lisbon. And she's also the supervisory board member of the European Cultural Foundation. So please join me in welcoming Catarina Vaz-Pinto. And then third up is a member of the OMC group. Do all people in the room here know what the OMC group is? It's a little bit of a test for the crowd. Some people do, not everyone. It is the open method of coordination on libraries, which represents the 27 EU countries and basically gives expert advice on European bodies how to deal and to hopefully make sure to teach the EU to make sure that more libraries are thriving all across Europe. He's also a member and works for the Dutch Association of Public Libraries. Please join me in welcoming the co-chair of the OMC group, Klaas Gommers. And before we get talking, we'll start with the video again. We're traveling all the way down to the north of Spain, to a tiny community there, just close to the coast, with little over 200 inhabitants, where local residents have been setting up, transforming a school building into a local library.
Busto es un pequeño pueblo de tan solo 200 habitantes situado en la costa norte de España. Normalmente es un sitio muy tranquilo, pero durante los fines de semana hay un lugar que se llena de gente de toda la comunidad. Y ese lugar es la biblioteca. Y allí es donde me voy a encontrar con Eva, que me va a explicar cómo empezó el proyecto.
La idea surgió porque este edificio estaba un poco abandonado. Entonces, una vecina propuso que se podía crear aquí una pequeña biblioteca. Y ella ofreció una bolsa con libros que tenía en su casa. Pintamos, limpiamos, empezamos a poner las estanterías y ahí empezamos a colocar los libros.
A Yaray, que tiene 9 años, le encanta venir aquí a leer. Su padre, Humberto, también venía aquí de pequeño, pero cuando esto no era una biblioteca, sino un colegio.
Estoy aquí en un aula, que aquí estábamos hasta sexto.
¿Y qué recuerdos tienes de aquí?
Tengo buenos recuerdos, muy buenos y algunos malos, pero bueno, más buenos.
¿Por qué?
Algunos atrasados. Mi hijo viene a la Biblia gracias a esta gente que hicieron este proyecto, que es fantástico, porque reúne este vecino, reúne este tal, y bueno, por lo menos tienes escuelas abiertas.
En zonas rurales como estas, afectadas por la despoblación, hay poco acceso a servicios públicos. Las familias jóvenes se van del pueblo en búsqueda de trabajo u otro estilo de vida. María Cristina ha visto su pueblo cambiar a lo largo de los años. Entonces usted ha vivido aquí siempre, ¿verdad?
Siempre, siempre. Pues teníamos vacas y sembrábamos fabas.
¿Y ahora sigue la gente sembrando tanto o es menos?
No, menos, sí, menos. Yo si me vuelvo joven tampoco me cogería eso.
¿Un trabajo duro?
Muy duro, sí, muy duro.
La biblioteca es un lugar de encuentro para la comunidad, algo que parecía haberse perdido.
Buenas. A ver, traigo este libro, pero no me gustó nada, Eva, no me gustó.
Venga, va, pues devolvemos y ya te digo yo otro que te...
Eso.
Siempre te ha interesado la lectura.
Sí, siempre, desde nena. Tengo un montón de libros en casa y los que mandé para aquí antes de que tuviesen tantos libros, vaya.
Una y la pescadora.
¿Cuáles son tus libros preferidos?
A mí me gustan los libros de animales. Normalmente venimos solos en bici, cogemos el libro, cogemos unas chuches y nos vamos.
Yo interesa la historia de España, de la guerra civil, de todo eso, porque vi una cosa que mi padre tuviera una guerra, contaba mis historias y ahora salen los libros.
¿Ha leído muchos libros ya de la biblioteca?
Sí, desde que abrió todo. Ahora, a ver, léese más por invierno, porque por invierno no sale a ningún lado, estás en casa y estás, prendes la cocina, poneste junto al fuego y a leer.
Y la gente pregunta, a veces llega y dice, oye, ¿qué necesitáis? Pues necesitamos una estantería. Vale, cómprala, que yo la pago. El ayuntamiento, a pesar de que es el propietario del edificio, no ayuda monetariamente prácticamente nada. Tenemos firmado un convenio ya desde hace 2 años, pero ese convenio nunca se llegó a materializar. Este edificio era un colegio, era el colegio del pueblo. Es mucho más que un edificio para nosotros. La gente está muy orgullosa de esta biblioteca.
So are the people from the Busta Library present here today? Not today. Anyone? Anyway, still, I think what an amazing video, right? I think this shows the value that library has for a local, a tiny community like this. Mr. Burton, what stood out for you when watching this video?
I think it's just the community-focused nature of those buildings. It's exactly what the people need on their doorstep, and the pride that people take in that space. I think, as we heard this morning, some people are surprised or grateful for new facilities like that, and I think it should be a right and an expectation to have that. So, you know, small communities having something on their doorstep that does from the youngest child in the community through to some of the older residents and serves the needs of everyone.
And is this, Mr. Gommers, is this something unique we're seeing here, that in such a tiny village, I mean, residents have been taken up the initiatives themselves to set something up, but you can see indeed the value it has to the community?
I would say it's unique in the sense it's their place and their ownership, and the fact that people take ownership more and more of their library. I always find it interesting that people talk about my library and not per se my supermarket or my let's say school. The ownership of that library is so strong, and that's what I'm seeing throughout Europe, where people take ownership when they're building it, but also stand up when potential closing is at hand. That also what the deputy mayor said earlier today, don't mess with the branch, because then the letter starts pouring in.
And also you get such a positive vibe from this, right? I mean, it's really touching, I would say. But on the other hand, it's also quite sad to note that their relationship with the local government, it's almost inexistent. It's not there. So there's also a weird relationship, or let's say a dark side to this video.
Yes, but I do mainly see, in sharing with Luke, the positive optimism, where I think the moment that government doesn't acknowledge it enough, it's the people that show the value, that it's already in the lady coming in saying good morning to everyone, saying how are you doing. It's also what's your question of government, how much are you expecting, and this is where it's happening. So I'm seeing more the beauty than the dark side.
Yeah. That's good. I think that's also the important lens, maybe, to look to that bigger question we're trying to answer, right? How can libraries thrive instead of survive? And maybe it's just a semantic thing, and all are surviving, but we want to make them thrive. Ms. Vaz-Pinto, you've been a state secretary, you've been a deputy mayor of Lisbon. What kind of situation did you come into when you were a deputy mayor of Lisbon? What was the state of libraries back then that you thought, I'm going to change some things here?
The Lisbon network already existed, and in my country we have, we lived under a dictatorship until 1974, so it was a long time, and so the first real important public cultural program was on libraries, and it dated already from 1988. It was a government program, and the intention was to cover all the country. It was a partnership between local government, central government, and local government. And when I arrived, so when I was state secretary, so this program has ups and downs as depending of the governments, but still it's the most permanent public policy program on culture that exists in my country, which I think it's very important, and we have a very good team of librarians, very also committed people. So when I was in government, we gave a push in the national government, and again when I was in the city, there was already a city network, a library network, but again it was a little bit stagnated. And we thought it was the time to renew it and to bring it into the 21st century. So the first thing we did, it was a strategic plan. I came into office, it was 2009, so right after the financial crisis. So in fact, we didn't have much money to do many things. We had some European money for urban regeneration that we used to renovate and build some libraries, but all the others didn't have money, so we made the strategical thinking. So
it was a bit of survival back in the day.
Yeah, and for 2 years we did a kind of we had an advisory group. It was in the city with the people from the libraries field, and we built this program that was intended not only to renovate the existing libraries, to expand the network with more, so the network would cover all the cities. So now we have 18 in Lisbon, 18 libraries, not any as big as this one, because Lisbon is also small, but the territory is quite covered. But mainly the most important is to renew the mission in order for them to become the library of the 21st century, which means not only about books, but all the other services that we have been watching in all these projects that are around. And
So that really has become a European-wide change of relevance, of vision and mission, you could say.
Yeah.
But still, before diving into that future role maybe of libraries, I just want to touch in again, Mr. Gommers, as you maybe also have that European perspective, being a co-chair of that OMC group. Could you say something about the state of libraries in Europe, and what are some of the maybe regional differences that you see?
Yeah, big question, and I thought you did a great job in summarizing what we're trying to do as the OMC group. And I think the main point is there that we're trying to recommend to the European Council and the European Commission, and what can you do to strengthen the multiple roles of libraries? Because we know the traditional role and what we're seeing today on the social, democratic, environmental role. How can you strengthen these multiple roles from what you are? And what I'm seeing, we have so much energy in the group, because I think in every country, and we have a lot of luck with that, the experts which are together in this group have the passion and the vision, which also Katharina showed in Lisbon, of what the 21st century library is and how you should facilitate those multiple roles. And I think what we're seeing are two elements: where it's acknowledged and then funded is where really the potential is so much what we're seeing today. And especially where the acknowledgement is not yet in place in the minds of perhaps the people, the visitors, but specifically the politicians and policymakers. It's not on the radar. And I thought the conversation about advocacy earlier on is an important one in that sense, that how can we strengthen and embolden the important work which is being done, but it's also perhaps so small in its gestures, saying, how are you doing, getting that cup of coffee, having that democratic conversation to highlight that. And I think if you look at regions, I'm very impressed that I don't see regional differences in terms of this region, let's say the south or the north is doing better than the east or the west, but I'm seeing a diversity within countries and regions that says, bigger or smaller, even there you see a dispersion of whether or not that acknowledgement is there. So I think it's inherent also to the local system, which is inherent to how libraries are being funded.
And we know that from literature there has been disparities, as you say, also within within countries themselves. Mr. Burton, also in the UK, is there the difference between cities that have, like Birmingham and London, and bigger cities that have just more funding to better equip, let's say, the 21st century library, as opposed to maybe smaller towns that have less resources, also like Busto in the north of Spain? How do you transform that, or how do you make sure that also smaller towns or poorer regions, more rural regions, also have the same access to resources as the bigger towns and cities?
Well, it's interesting as well. You talk about Birmingham as a good example, because they're in a pretty bad position at the moment. You know, funding-wise, they're effectively bankrupt. They're going through some challenges. So the financial situation and the offer in England, particularly, is maybe not as simple as big town, better, smaller suffering. I think we see. I think on the point of surviving and thriving, libraries, in spite of huge challenges, doing brilliant work, like what we're seeing here over these few days. I think the important part there is the people that are delivering the services. So yes, there is an uneven playing field for some people. Some places where libraries are built into cultural strategies or are part of public health agendas, then they are sometimes better funded. But there are other places where there are committed, dedicated librarians doing the hard work on the ground. So with minimal resources, the impact they're having is significant. And the message we try and send is, imagine what they could do if they were properly or better funded. So I think the disparities come from, we've heard talking of advocacy. You know, the message of what a modern public library service delivers is still a challenge. So we heard earlier Michaela saying she hadn't used a library for a year, went in and was like, wow, this is amazing. And people, when they know what's available, are surprised and enthused, but how do we get people through the door?
So take us with you, because you're the director of Libraries of the Arts Council in England. So you have that strong role, and I think also an advocacy role, right, in relation to the UK government. What is the current state of play of trying to get funding or acknowledgement, or how do you do that?
Well, we're in an interesting position now, having had 15 years of or 14 years of the previous government. We have a new government, and things sound still difficult, but the mood music has changed, if you like. I think what we try and do is talk about the number of ways that libraries can support lots of agendas. So it's interesting, if Librarians Ran Europe, one of the questions is, libraries shouldn't be the answer to everything all of the time, but are often the answer to a lot of things a lot of the time. And I think with the challenges that we face with budgets, library services focus on areas of expertise. So a universal service, free at the point of access, from birth to, cradle to grave? Is that too depressing? But actually, services focusing on things that they specialise in, so good mental health, climate change, digital inclusion. Libraries have been responsive and adaptive to challenges since, well, in the UK since 1850, when the Public Libraries Act came into being. They've changed over time and have had to. Our Libraries Act was written in 1964 and still talks about gramophone records, has no mention of computers. But the essence of it is equality, equity, access to good quality information, access to safe, welcoming spaces, and access to reading for pleasure. So I think that sits at the heart of what everyone tries to do. There are added barriers that are added when it comes to access, but libraries remain, and certainly Arts Council, we see they remain the lowest barrier to access for cultural activity. We were talking earlier, for some people, the only cultural experience, and in the video we just saw, may be the library. They don't have access to theatre, dance, cinema. So that cultural experience on their doorstep by people who look and sound like them is invaluable.
So it's not just the funding, but it's also changing that narrative of also what you've been working on. How can we talk about the new relevance for the library for societies? And still the financial part is an important one, right? Something that we cannot ignore, unfortunately. A recent survey from this group, actually, from the Europe Challenge, found that from you guys, the 30 countries, nearly all participants, actually 100% of participants, were concerned about their library's financial futures. 100%, and 91% of you are worried about losing relevance amongst the public. So that is quite a clear sign. How do you navigate in that difficult financial position? Is that the reason why a stronger advocacy network needs to arise?
I would say that for me, it's. I think in my country it's not that much that people don't find a relevance in the library. I would say it's more important for the public, for governments to give the conditions for the libraries to fulfill their missions. And I think I'm not. I feel that there is a growing awareness by politicians about the role of libraries, and it's not. And we can see it at the European level that this group was created, and there is an assignment by the Council. So, in order for the libraries to be considered as a kind of priority public cultural institution, and I think it takes time, but there is a growing awareness from the local authorities. I think it's more easy, and I think more and more local politicians understand, because they are very close and they have a relation of proximity, and I don't see that that there is, well, it's a growing awareness. So, but still, you need a strong advocacy. In my case, in Lisbon, well, also, you know, I have to convince my colleagues, my government colleagues, of the role of the libraries. And after this year, so for me, it was very important to show the evidence. And we created a new library in the deprived neighborhood. And I had 2 mayors. I was 12 years deputy mayor, and I have 1 mayor. I worked with 1 mayor for 5 years, and with the other 6 years. And the second mayor, who was not involved in the decision of creating this library, when he saw the space, he said, "What is this? What is this huge space for? Maybe it's the biggest public investment that we made in the city." And he was really, how much did it cost? How much money? You know. He was really not very trusted.
Not very happy about it.
Not very happy in the beginning. But then when he started to see the library working, and it was really a kind of, you know, even local people, they thought in the beginning that, is it a new police department, because it's a very complicated area. And when they started to go into the library, it was a very incredible experience. And all the locals, from young people, we had gaming for young people, we had computers for young people that they hadn't at home. We had all the kind of programs we made in this library with people from all ages, and it really transformed the neighborhood. And then my mayor, in the end, he wanted to build more and more libraries. And I said, okay, wait, I want to also, but you know, it's not only the building, you have to have librarians, you have all the other stuff, you have to have money to buy books, so take it easy. But in the end, I said, well, he was convinced, so, you know, and what I see all over, it's also that politicians see that libraries are these neutral and safe places where people can meet together and slow down the tensions that exist in society. And politicians start to look at that and understand that, well, maybe there is a role to play, and this is what we have to fight for, I would say, and make this kind of these showcases, bring it on another places. It's always a problem. We, the cultural people involved in the cultural sector, are very committed to what we do, but we are not good enough on explaining the other sectors what we do. As someone said today, like all the work that libraries are doing on climate change awareness or mental health awareness, it's not enough yet how the others, the people who work in the other fields, understand the role libraries in this case can have.
So indeed, within this new relevance of libraries and the new forms maybe that libraries are taking on, Mr. Burton, how do you make sure that librarians and people working for a library or in a library, that they keep up with all the developments? Because society is changing so fast, and I have the feeling like they have to keep up with the bigger issues. Like, it's not just indeed book, it's about mental health, it's about climate change, it's about AI. How do you make sure that you get all the people involved within your library to keep up with the developments yourself?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face is professional development of staff, talking to people here, actually to get the time out of the day job, and more importantly, the people who are doing the work on the front line. As director for libraries, it's easy for me to go to something like this, but actually if you are colleagues delivering frontline services in Oldham and Stockport and Suffolk, it's difficult to convince people to get the time to come and develop, but it's critical to the job. I think we need to harness, there's better use of digital technologies in terms of making webinars and disseminating information that way. I think toolkits is a word that's overused, but where are the things we can learn best practice from other places and replicate that? So the examples we've seen in the marketplaces today, they are things that we could be doing across Europe. So learning from each other, shamelessly stealing people's ideas and taking them back and using them. I think that there's something there. I think there does need to be a point as well where libraries and people working in them need to sometimes say no. That because we are responsive and adaptive to communities, people will put things onto libraries. So the ask is to do more and more with less. And sometimes we need to either say we can't do all of these things, or we need to partner with people better to do that. And I think there's a real opportunity where we were hearing again before, doing those things upstream. So before it becomes a problem, how do we have interventions with good mental health that stop people going into expensive procedures and treatment? But then how do we make the case to say, in the UK, we can save the NHS £10 million if you give us £2 million now? And we need to learn the language of those organisations. I think, certainly I would say in England, libraries have had to justify themselves as places other than books or social infrastructure. They've had to demonstrate how they can support business growth, good mental health, access to culture, because that's in order to try and attract the funding to do that. So I think it's about finding the time and acknowledging that we need frontline staff to be given the skills, but at the same time they can't be mental health workers and nurses and teachers. Yeah, you can't expect so much. I can also imagine of those.
If I can add to that, where I agree and would follow up on, I think one of the biggest skills, two skills of librarians are empathy and curiosity. And there's so much resources in your community. By acknowledging we don't know everything, but we have a space, we have curious people, and we are able to bring people together. So I think one of the biggest opportunities, and I think the example from the UK where the communal garden, there is so much knowledge which we can tap in the community, and we have the resources in order to put them at the center stage. And then you have a whole collective of people who will help you with all these challenges.
I was just wanting to follow up on, you know, these newer developments. Of course, there's also AI, digitization. A large part of our life is increasingly becoming digital. We're glued to our smartphones. Unfortunately, you know, I could maybe say even addicted for a large part. What is the relationship for libraries nowadays, and how can they adapt to this development where more and more people are glued to their smartphones? How do you work with that?
I think maybe reality is changing a little bit because people are very addicted. But what we see now, it's people are getting more and more tired and from screens. And what all these mental health issues, problems reveal, this is a bad result of being too much. To have too much addictions to screens and to digital tools. So I think there is also a new role for libraries, because what we've seen, for instance, in this short film, it's, you know, a rural landscape. For people and for me, the library is the meeting place for excellence. So it's a meeting place, but in rural areas. But now again, it's a reinforced role of meeting, of face-to-face meeting, because I think one of the main issues nowadays is how to balance this digital world and the physical world, and we are in that struggle. Yeah, so, it is a struggle. Yeah, it's a struggle. So I think libraries have to be develop their digital services, but on the other hand, they are the place for people to meet, and people need to meet. And after COVID, this began even more an issue. And also the question of, for instance, in my country, also there is books are having there is a sale rise on books, so on printed books, and mainly from young people. So it's crucial, how do we invent new ways of linking the digital and the real? For instance, what is the role of TikTokers to promote reading?
Are there indeed some best practices, let's say, how to balance this digital world and the library?
Well, there was a piece I would say this because we helped fund it, but there was a piece of research that the Chartered Institute of Librarians in the UK did called Come Rain or Shine, and it came from a place of trying to look at libraries planning better, but rather than 3, 4, 5 years, it's 20, 30, 40 years. So the idea was to look at futures literacy. So given that these are the potential challenges we will be facing, how would libraries respond to them? And some of what came from that was that your point on digital and social, there's a key role for libraries to play in digital and social infrastructure. So post-COVID, having those safe spaces for people to come and just exist, as we've heard, but also the spaces to come and access digital technology and digital skills in a safe space. And with the rise of large language models and what we're seeing with emerging technologies, it's an extension of the digital literacy skills that librarians have been doing since the late 90s, or probably earlier than that. It's not about, as Claes said, it's not about understanding how it works, but it's having the curious mind and the critical thinking to question what they're seeing. So I think the ability to provide digital support in a physical space allows us to do both the social, tackling isolation and loneliness, but also giving people skills to interact in an increasingly digital space.
One of my examples is where a local library redesigned their children's department, interactive screens, and after a few months, the parents came and said, perhaps we can get rid of the screens, because we want a space where we see each other, the children play one another. And I think an important one here is to say as well, to keep realizing how many people do not have access to digital at all, or digital technology, let's say 3D printing, or the understanding of the moment the doctor will say in the future, near future, we've made the decision based on AI, so this is the better treatment for you. How many people do understand how that decision came to be, and do they feel at ease with that? So I think there's a very large relevance we're seeing, at least here in the Netherlands, and I'm seeing with my colleagues as well, that having this digital revolution, which is going in high speed, to keep having also everyone in mind in an inclusive way who does not fare that well with an increasing digitization, and do we understand enough what the impact is on people's lives? So, and also I would say have the best Wi-Fi in town, because then you can seduce people to do other things as well.
And, yeah, and just to follow up on that, maybe, you recently posted a Volkskrant article, People's Paper article on your LinkedIn about the Dutch case, how there's been a resurgence for libraries in the Netherlands. What are some of the best practices or maybe government policies that are actually working for libraries, and what can we all learn from those?
I think what was a very good element of the Dutch policy is that they said we want to have the physical library closer in people's neighborhoods and in areas as well. So you should be able to have access to a physical library and library services. So the investment was very much aimed at creating new facilities, but also strengthening opening hours, but also giving space for local municipalities and libraries to invest to what they thought was needed in their community. That could be an investment on digital, that could be an investment on specifically children, or could be we need to have a community worker, a community librarian. So I think having that focus of, if you're close in the proximity, that means that you can work with the communities. And you don't need to have, I don't think everyone could have a building like we're seeing here, but it's also not the purpose which is everywhere needed. So I think that's very important.
I even understood that in this new policy, there's going to be a mandatory library in every municipality of the Netherlands.
Yes, that's correct. Because there's also still municipalities which do not have a library at this moment, and I think, and we have a new government at the moment which is continuing the policy, and we're seeing that from the left to the right in the spectrum, the importance of having that nearby facility in the workers specifically has been, I think, really also reimbursement to the whole library field here.
I just wanted to add this question of proximity and what the big change also that we made with the new libraries we created in Lisbon. It was this idea that the library serves the community and the community helps to co-design what the library is for. So before, in the process of building the new libraries, we had focus group with the community, and so each library is different. You know, in the end, you have some common trends and common services, but then each library serves its own community, and this is a very important. This is a way of how do you build bottom-up projects nowadays, and that's why I also kind of confident in the role of libraries in all these projects where you can bring the community to build their own, to create ownership, and as you said, so it's very much with globalization. We have also this other trend that places are having more and more at local level. You see many interesting experience growing and happening, and many of them, like all these that we've seen with all these libraries, that gives you a lot of hope that something can change in the future and can build a better world.
So that even the development of a library becomes a democratic practice.
Yes, very
included.
much, because because all these digital possibilities, we tend to, and technology it's also for the bad and for the good. And what we see nowadays with social network is very much all this alienation, fake news, and all this post-truth society that we live in. But on the other hand, it's a very powerful tool for communities to organize.
Yeah. So on that,
and to share the common interest and to fight for, if they want. We were talking about the place where the new library, Amsterdam library, will be placed. If the community wants it to be in a place or in another place, this plays a role. And people, individuals, if they are organized collectively, can be very powerful nowadays.
So bringing it back, Mr. Burton, to what we started off this morning with Mr. Wilkins also saying these 65,000 libraries could also form a new offline social network and maybe also a digital network. Where should we start? Maybe this is a good start, of course, the Euro Challenge. How do you think we can expand that role of advocacy within this network?
I think it's a good starting point because libraries and library workers are by nature collaborative and sharing. So I think it's giving space to do this kind of thing. I think, sadly, as a colleague calls it, Brexit, the gift that keeps on giving for the UK, we're keen to try and rebuild those relations with our European colleagues, and the messages coming from central government are suggesting that'll change. But I think there is something about giving these opportunities, the space, the face-to-face space to do it. There are opportunities for digital technology to allow online sharing, but there's nothing quite as good as face-to-face communication workshops like this. So I think there's keeping those communication links going between services, but then also those that are running services acknowledging the value and giving people time out to do that, because you can see the connections that have been made in the time that the challenge has been happening. So I think it should be easy. It's an open door, if you like, because everyone is willing to share. I think it's just making the time to do it and acknowledging that time has value.
Yeah. Taking these lessons into account, are there any questions for our three panelists? Anything on valuable lessons? Anything you'd like to share? Any questions so far? Here up front.
Thanks for this really valuable information, sharing your experiences. Well, I know that we're on the library conference focusing on public libraries and speaking about the role of the public library within our European societies, I cannot help but thinking also of the role that culture in general has in our societies, and in which way actually we are relating to the future of the culture sector in general, and the role that can play to wider audience, actually developing its own cultural habits and cultural needs, which in a way are fulfilled also by public libraries. If it's not too much asking that, maybe if you can relate also to that topic, and if you think that public libraries as public cultural institutions are on a safer side, let's say in that way, of the cultural institutions sector in general.
So maybe as you're within the Arts Council, I also immediately think of you, Mr. Burton, relating to that, yeah, maybe the larger cultural sector.
I mean, it's been a challenge for Arts Council. I've only been with the Arts Council for nearly 2 years now, but previously the Museums, Libraries and Archive Council managed libraries, and that was closed down. And the Arts Council has spent a bit of time trying to explain how libraries feed into that cultural role. I think in the UK and England specifically, because libraries serve, in local authorities when they're managed, they sit within public health or customer service. They sit within different departments. And I'm not sure that every library service in England sees itself as a cultural institution. They definitely are, but I'm not sure that they see themselves as that. So while libraries, and again we say this, you know, libraries are not special and different, but they are special and different. You know, they are that really low barrier to access. People will walk through a library and ask anything. And they'll go through a library when they won't go to a theatre or a doctor. You know, in Leeds in England, you can go and get maternity help in a library, walk through the door. You can go to libraries in Suffolk and get support with mental health, whereas people, for various reasons, find it challenging to go to hospitals. I think that's a real strength, but at the same time, I think the wider cultural sector and other organisations like museums and theatres would kill for the kind of reach that public libraries have, because they're in the hearts of their communities, for and with their communities. So I think there is still a bit of a role for libraries, certainly in the UK, to market themselves as cultural institutions, and not just as venues where we'll put on a performance, but co-creators and co-builders of content, and you know, seeing content that's made by people who look and sound like you, not something that's shipped in from London or Paris or Berlin, you know, but actually something that speaks to your experience and reflects the life that you live. So I think that libraries are critical to widening cultural access, but I think, speaking certainly in the UK, there is a lot of work to do to position them more strongly as cultural venues.
Thank you so much for your question. Any final room for a final question here up front? The mic is behind you.
From practical reasons, to have the microphone very close, so I have also a practical question to this panel. This is the third round of the Europe Challenge. The first one was a pilot of 7. The second one was 32 participants, and this one is 55, if I'm correct. So, what would you say is the next step in this process? Is it even bigger, or is it something else, building on the experience that is created? And yeah, so
that's a good question. And I have the feeling, well, will I first give you the answer, what would be your dream? And then later I'm going to ask the same question to the director of the European Cultural Foundation to see if he also has an answer. But Miss, should it be something for all 65,000 libraries, in your opinion?
For sure. This is my dream.
We need a bigger library then to host us.
No, not really. It's yeah, of course, maybe we can do it in another space, an outdoor space maybe, but also the thing of, also relating to the former question, one of the problems is sometimes the cultural sector in itself, which is a very broad ecosystem, also it's very divided and works by silos. And this is something that we should, and I think the libraries precisely are the most transversal cultural institutions, because the libraries work for all in creating access to culture and education, lifelong education. They create the audiences and the awareness. It's the first, for me, it was always the library is the first door into the access to culture. So because of its proximity, it's open door, it's free, so it works for the whole sector, and this is not always perceived by the other colleagues from other sectors. But yes, of course, I'm very. My dream is for the libraries all over Europe to become the 65,000 libraries to become the heart of our future.
All right, well, you see an extra chair being put down, so I'd like to invite another special guest for this final question, and then for another special moment. So may I please invite Mr. Andrew Wilkins to the floor. And we'll get to a special launch moment in a second, Mr. Wilkins, but I think this is an amazing opportunity to maybe also reflect a little bit on this question of vision, maybe, of where to with this amazing, I think, very successful program so far. What is that vision for, let's say, the 5 or 10 years after this?
Good question. And I said at the beginning, in a way, we see the Europe Challenge, the cooperation of the libraries, not only as a library program, but because our mission, the mission of the European Cultural Foundation, which this year will turn 70 years, is not to support libraries. The mission of the European Cultural Foundation is to grow a European sentiment, a sentiment of belonging among Europeans. So we are very much interested in the connection. Our foundation was the foundation which co-created the Erasmus program. So, and it was not because we are particularly interested in students, but because we are interested in how to connect Europeans and connect them through student exchange and universities. And in a way, it was a very similar approach, because there are, I don't know, now been thinking so much about libraries, I don't know how many universities there are, but let's assume there are also 60,000 universities. And it was a way of connecting universities through student exchange. And sometimes we're asked by other partners, if we go to other partners and say, you know, do you want to join? And they say, oh no, we don't fund public institutions. And I said, well, we're not funding public institutions, we are funding the connection. So come on board. And I think that is what is driving us. We believe, or I believe, the libraries are a very unique space. It's an infrastructure, but it's not just an infrastructure like, you know, the railways or something. Also, maybe it is somehow also, but they are everywhere. They are very local. They are very specific. They are very different, each of them, but there's something in common. And actually, sometimes when I say, why are you working with libraries? You know, I said, you know, I see libraries as a public space where you also can get a book out. So the actual lending of books is actually for libraries not, you know, the most important thing. It's actually a place, and we saw that also in the videos, where people come, where it is part of their community, and there are all sorts of things taking place, whether it's 3D printing, whether it's books, whether it's talks, whether it's actually also like we heard from libraries in Denmark, this kind of, you know, democracy fitness and things like that. So great network, and we hope that out of this library network, and you know, we have a lot of libraries here, and I'm so happy to see so many, and that that we develop this belonging from the local to the European. And that is my dream. And in a way, I see that yardstick of the 65,000. So let's assume we have now involved around 200. So how do we get to the other 64,800? And maybe that is also the connection to class.
Because further to further develop this connection, I think we have a special launch moment now, right? Yeah. I think now is the time. Klaas Euroforce, the co-chair of this OMC group, a direct connection with the European bodies. Of course, this whole Europe Challenge, all you guys and ECF has put together a publication of this year's challenge and a booklet with some very special recommendations. And I think now we'll do an official handover moment. So please, ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for all my guests and the publication. Thank you.
So make the connection to what I said before. I mean, one thing.
We're making this very official now. This is your moment.
This is my moment. No, but you know, I would say the last 3 years, referring to the question, were kind of a kickstart. You know, seeing it very much like a startup. You know, we tried something, and very practically, not writing big papers or so, apart from this one now. But let's say we were very practical. And maybe we failed a lot too, but you know, we went on, and we came that far. But we realized to move on, we need partners, and we have a lot of partners actually also present here from the Arts Council, von Nazione Cariplo, the Postcode Lottery in Germany, and so on and so on. But we need many more to go to the 65,000. And there is this group, OMC, now you all know what it is, a very important thing, and they will help the European Union to develop a policy on libraries, we hope. And we together, we took what we learned actually in the last 3 years, very practical thing, not sitting in an office, but talking to you, having meetings like this, and we put this in this wonderful book. And there is a kind of a special leaflet also with recommendations, and we hope, Klaas, that you are, you know, this important man from the OMC, that you take this to Brussels, to your colleagues, and take it as a sort of a practitioner's input into this process. And then maybe through you, through the other members of this important OMC group and the European Union, we can actually reach the 65,000. We can actually create this European social network of the libraries, and you can count on all these people. You can count on the European Cultural Foundation to support you, but we also count on you, that you take this book.
And thank you so much. And I'm happy to say that various members are here today as well from the OMC. So it's not just me who have to take it along. So I'm counting on all of you as well. And I think what is so amazing about today is that we were asked as experts to reflect on the multiple roles of public libraries, including when it comes to democracy, including when it comes to social cohesion and the climate change and the environmental. And this is part of the answer we are looking for, and mainly the energy we're feeling here today and throughout Europe. This is what we are doing together, and now we have to make it be heard.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We've come to the end. We're going to part ways. We're never going to configure in this way ever again. This is it. And I guess my last question to you is, what happens after we summit?
I guess I've got some reading to do. There's amazing publications, and I think we're going to marinate with all these new insights and really contemplate on the beautiful things that have been said about, indeed, all those roles of the library in the 21st century. So thank you indeed all for coming down here and sharing all these ideas and insights. And now I think it's more than time that you start running Europe.
Yeah. But before you run Europe, let me say this. Also, thank you to this beautiful space. Thanks to the Oberlibrary. Thanks to the city. And after the summit, I hope you will take a break, rest, find some time to rest. And the journey isn't over. It continues. There are many more trails and uncharted territories for you all to discover. So with that, I say goodbye, and we are done with today's session.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now you can. Get up and go.